You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Enters Fate Stay Night. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of bubbajack on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. 6-year-old Izukumidoriya was making his way home after possibly the worst day of his young life. His friendship with Kachin felt well and truly dead after today. It was strained to the limit after he found out 2 years prior that it was impossible for him to have a quirk. That becoming a hero like All Might, for him was not possible, was soul-crushing. Then the bullying started. His classmates were led by none other than his friend. He could endure that. He could stand being called Deku, useless by his friend. But then, he crossed the line today. By willingly picking on someone weaker than him. The boy didn't do anything to deserve it, but he did it anyway. And when he stood up to him, well, he'd never seen him that angry before. I'm not useless. I can still be a hero, and I'll prove it to you and everyone else Kakin. The young boy thought to himself on his way home from school. As he passed a darkened alleyway, he heard some rough voices shout, "Oi, you drunk bstrd, apologize." Peering into the darkness, he found a dozen Yazuka types with quirks ranging from fire manipulation to quill manifestation surrounding an equally odd group of foreigners. The oldest looking of the group was a tall and lanky man with an ashy complexion and wild gray hair, with spittle dribbling from his chin. He was wearing a lab coat over an off-blue shirt and brown pants and shoes. Hiding behind him looking more nervous than Izuku himself felt was a boy older than he was, with a mop of brown hair on his head and he wore a yellow shirt with jeans. His eyes darting around in a panic. While the first two looked average, their companions, by contrast, looked like cosplayers. The older of the two was a blocky-built older man with slicked-back gray hair and a full, if wild-looking beard, his eyes crimson glowing pinpricks in the darkness. He wore a dark foreign suit trimmed in gray with white gloves covering his hands, both of which rested atop an ornate cane. The last member of the group looked to be a young man in his 20s, elegant facial features, and long red hair. He was garbed in a steel and gold-trimmed breastplate, with over-the-top pauldrons, which were placed over a white kimono. "Come on guys, let's teach these foreigners so manners." The one with quills coming out his body said to the others, causing them to begin to move forward slowly threateningly. He didn't even know his legs were moving till he was suddenly in front of the thugs, his whole body shaking in fear, yet he stood firm. Leave them alone. The Yazuka paused collectively seeing a little kid come out of nowhere. Before moving forward once again, and the leader growled out, "Get out of the way brat. The old drunk owes me for puking all over my shoes. That's a poor excuse, F for hurting people." But the delinquents didn't feel like listening. Instead, the one with the quills who had a layer of vomit coating his shoes took a swing at the boy, smacking him aside and causing several of said spines to get stuck in his cheek. "I said get out of the way you brat." Suddenly the Yazuka found his head smashed into the wall, with one eye staring between two fingers. He locked eyes with the red-eyed old man who was grinning at him. Yet it was malicious, and his smile was too broad, it showed off just how sharp his teeth were, particularly his canines. When he spoke his voice a deep jovial timbre, "Now lad, I realize my friend upset you dash." This caused the scientist to scoff, "PFF, friend? Don't flatter yourself, you tree-strong reject. If anything I see you as a potential, test subject for some of my more dangerous experiments. Meaning you a little bit more useful than my PCSHT son-in-law." 'Cause at least I can expect you to regenerate from a neutrino bomb. Now can we hurry this along? I really gotta take a SHT. Rick, could you please look at the kid? He was kind enough to help us. Rick Sanchez turned to his grandson, Morty. Burp, we can't just go around helping every Grace, dickhead, and Todd, that shows up in the wrong place at the wrong time. If anything, we should be grateful he chose to be a meat shield and use it to our advantage, like this. Rick pulled his portal gun from his jacket and proceeded to blast the ground around the quirk users, causing them to fall into unknown alternate dimensions. Sanchez, you say some of the sweetest things. The older man turned his attention back to the punk in his grasp, as an almost palpable bloodlust filled the air. Now, as I was saying, though my associate vomited on your shoes, that is no reason to harm a child. So be a good little boy, and head on home unless you want to end up like your friends. Zelrich Kushner Schweinorg, the old man of the jewels, dead apostle and holder of the second magic, then dropped the now terrified wannabe gangster who ran down the alley, a prominent stain in the front of his pants. Turning to the scientist who was still arguing with his grandson, he looked over to the young lad who had valiantly tried to defend them, albeit in vain. He had a messy mop of green hair, a smattering freckles dotting his pale face. Several large tines were sticking into the boy's left cheek. Turning to Rick, who by now had somehow put Morty in a leg lock, he said, Sanchez, come here and give the boy a once-over. As soon as Morty says, Uncle. Embrace, my, butt, Rick. Morty retorted, who had reached up and wrapped his hands around his grandfather's throat, attempting to choke him even as he was sitting on his back, pulling his leg. Enough. The wizard marshal's voice boomed through the alleyway, having nothing to do with acoustics, shaking the dust off the buildings. Rick just stared as the vampire's eyes glowed threateningly brighter before looking down at his grandson, who said, Please, Rick. Huffing, the jaded scientist got off his sidekick and his way over to the injured boy. Taking a tool out of his coat, he did a quick scan with it before flatly replied, Kid's got a goose egg on his head, and spines sticking in his face, but other than that, he's okay. Can you help him, Rick? Morty, who by now had picked himself up off the ground and made his way over, asked, concern and worry in his tone. I can. Yet he stood there doing nothing. Well, what are you waiting for? Morty asked after a moment's pause. Rolling his eyes, Rick replied, I said I could help, I never said I would. Burp. Taking him by the coat and shaking him, Morty raved at his callous grandfather, God damn it, Rick. I know he didn't have to, but he tried to help us. That's gotta mean something, I mean, come on. Shoving Morty away, the super genius replied, alright already. I'll help, just get off your DMNPRD, Morty. Hand going into his jacket once more, Rick pulled out a familiar syringe Morty recognized. Hey, isn't that the broken bone formula you got from that one dimension? Yep. Burp, kept some of it, reverse engineered it, and, burp, then improved it. Now it can fix anything short of death. Observe, burp. He pricked the boy in the arm with the needle and injected most of the serum into his veins. Seconds later, the keratin-coated spines popped one by one out of his cheek and the goose egg on his head shrunk into nothingness moments before he awoke with a gasp. Easy, you're okay, little guy, Morty said, easing him into a sitting position. Shaking his head, to clear it of cobwebs, Izuku asked, what happened? You got, burp, knocked the F out, doing something stupid, burp. That's what happened. Rick told the boy, standing up. Surzex, who had remained quiet this entire time, finally spoke up, on the contrary, I found him to be quite the courageous little hero. Burp, of course you did. Surzex continued on as if Rick hadn't spoken, yet I can't help but wonder why you would get yourself involved with us. Standing up on shaky, nervous legs, Izuku replied, why you were all in TT trouble. That's all the reason IINN needed. Upon hearing this, Zelrich couldn't help himself. He threw his head back and laughed. This boy, so reckless, so willing to put himself on the line for others, he reminds me of him. Turning his crimson gaze onto the young lad in question, you remind me of someone I knew once, lad. You act just like him. Tell me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I really want to be a hero, sir. Hearing this, Zelrich grinned, showing his fangs. Yes, you're just like him. The young boy suddenly became glum, but I'm not sure if I can though. I don't have a quirk. A cough was heard, and Rick rudely interrupted. It's not like I hate to interrupt your trip down memory lane or anything, but I thought you brought us here because you claimed you found the quote, best Katsudon in the multiverse, end quote. Smacking his cane into his open palm, Zelrich got back on track. Right, so I did. To Katsudon. Katsudon? Izuku questioned. Yeah, you've been there. Is it as good as they say? Morty asked, having never had Japanese food before, much less the best in the multiverse. Yeah, you could say that, my mom's a chef there. Izuku admitted. Zelrich put his hands on his face and exclaimed, oh. My God. Your mom is the chef at Katsudon. Yeah. Well then, what are we waiting for? Lead the way. Consider getting us a bite to eat. A thank you for Savon. You're sorry, but. Rick said, grabbing the boy by the arm and dragging him out of the alley, only to be stopped by Morty, who said, Rick. We can't take advantage of a little kid. Only for Izuku to interject and say, it's fine. After the day I've had, some Katsudon sounds good alright about now. You heard the kid, Morty, let's go. Thus, the group of 5 made their way down the street. By the time they arrived, Izuku had managed to stutter out the history of the Katsudon restaurant. It was owned by the businessman Don Nico. He tried opening 2 businesses before Katsudon really took off. The first was a pet shop geared towards cats. It went out of business in 10 months. So he reinvented the store, turning it into a sedan dealership. That lasted a year and a half, but still ended up sinking. But, before it got bad, he reinvented his store again. Taking leftover bits and pieces from his previous stores, he opened up a restaurant. As they entered, they could see exactly what the young boy meant. Seats out of cars had been converted into booths which circled around the establishment. The legs of the tables consisted of cat trees. The floor was red and black checkered linoleum, and in the middle of the open floor was a giant square flat-top grill which had several people cooking over it. Customers could pick what they wanted in their katsudon, and then the chefs would cook it right in front of them. It was something the owner picked up when visiting America. As he walked in with his acquaintances. Yes, the young boy supposes that would work. He was met by Nico-san himself. He was a balding if kindly and well-meaning man who always looked after his employees and treated both them and their families well. Ah, Midoriya-kun, how are you? Ivy had better D-days, Nico-san. How are you? He asked, bowing politely. Looking the boy over and seeing him covered in scorch marks, his clothes covered in dust, the owner of the Katsudon restaurant frowned but nodded. Yes, I see. Well then, have a seat with your friends, and I'll bring a menu right over. Yeah. I keep a table reserved in the back just for you. Izuku's face lit up like a tree on Christmas before he muttered out, Thank you, sir. But you don't need to do that. Think nothing of it, my boy. I'm sure you'll make good use of it when you bring all your future girlfriends here on dates. GG girlfriends? I don't have any G-girls who are my friends, anymore anyway. And what's a D-dates? Laughing awkwardly due to forgetting the young boy's age, Nico-san told him, you'll figure it out when you're older. For now, just go have a seat. I'll be by in a minute with menus. Izuku was confused, but he just decided to nod and do as the older man said. Leading the group towards the back where several bright red bucket seats had been set in a circle around a large round table with enough space to seat almost 30 people. Taking their seats, Izuku ended up in between the older boy and the man with the cane. I don't even know their names. He realized with a start. Deciding to rectify that, he pulled on the sleeve of the elderly man with the cane. When prying crimson eyes locked onto his green ones, Izuku froze. Yet he smiled like a kindly grandpa, but the effect was ruined somewhat by the grin revealing his canine-like fangs. "What's wrong, lad? Something on your mind?" I just realized I don't know your NN names." Giving an awkward little chuckle, the elderly man bowed slightly at the waist, and introduced himself. "We did skip that part, didn't we? I am Kistjer Zelrich Schweinorg. But you can just call me Zelrich. Everyone does. I'm Morty, and this is my grandpa Rick." The older boy on Izuku's opposite side commented. "Burp, sup kid?" Rick greeted after taking a sip from his flask. The cosplayer spoke last. "I am Surzex Louis Cypher. And nice to meet you all, I'm Midoriya Izuku." He then paused for a moment, considering his next words carefully before finally saying, "Forgive me for saying this, but, for foreigners you all speak Japanese perfectly." "I travel a lot," Zelrich replied. "I'm a polyglot, it runs in the family." Surzex chimed in. "I, burp, created a throat lozenge that can teach anyone, burp, any language." Izuku looked at the elderly scientist in wonder. "Really?" Seeing him nod apathetically, he asked, "Do you have any that would teach English?" This caused Rick to smirk. "Only 4 and already looking to cheat the system, huh?" "And no, IW was just." Izuku tried to deny, only for Rick to ruffle his hair affectionately and say, "Good for you, kid. You recognize school for what it is, a bunch of CRP used to indoctrinate children, and teach them a bunch of bullshit." Reaching into his coat pocket, Rick pulled out a rainbow-colored lozenge, and forcing it into Izuku's mouth said, "Hope you don't mind Tutti Frutti, English is kinda the BSTRD love child of a lot of languages, so it tastes like that." "Oh, and what's Japanese taste like?" Zelrich inquired, his crimson eyes gleaming with mirth as Izuku started choking, his face turning a hue of blue. "If you must know, it tastes like grilled fish and soy sauce." "I wonder what vampire tastes like. Care to donate so I can find out?" "We taste like ash and mildew, or so I've been told by a friend of mine." Rick nodded before taking a swig of his flask while Morty proceeded to smack Izuku on the back. "I bet you, burp, do taste like butt." Ack. After a final good whack on the back from Morty, Izuku finally managed to swallow the lozenge that had been trapped in his throat. "You okay, Izuku?" Seeing the boy nod, Morty turned to his grandpa and said, "Rick, you almost killed him." "Not cool, man. Almost only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and, burp, attempted murder." Morty. Before the boy could retort, Don came back with their menus. "I'll give you a moment to look this over. But before that, drinks? Do you, burp, serve sake? 'Cause I'll have some of that. When in Japan, do as the Japanese do, right? Am I right?" "Hee hee, you know I am." Seconded. "Same." The waiter and proprietor's smile seemed forced before turning to the young boy and saying, "How exactly did you meet such a colorful cast of characters, Izuku-kun?" Before telling the men, "Yes, we do serve sake. He was kind enough to help us out of a rough spot with some delinquents on our way here," Zelrich informed the man. "Wubba lubba dub dub. Let's get smashed. Sake in the house." Burp. Shaking his head at Rick's enthusiasm, Don turned to the two miners. "And you too?" "Soda," they both said at the same time. "Coming right up." He scribbled on his menu before walking off. After he walked off, Rick asked his host, "So, anything, in particular, you'd recommend, kid?" "I'm a fan of S-sauce katsudon myself. They smother the pork cutlet in Worcester sauce." "Well, I know what I'm getting." Rick leaned back in his bucket seat, hands on his head, placing his feet up on the table as he did so. "Have you decided?" Don asked, returning with their drinks and shooting Rick a mild glare for having his feet on the table. Something the old foreigner completely ignored as he was currently too invested in picking his nose. After their orders were placed, the wizard marshal turned to his mousy host, Midoriya, I have a question for you. Why yes Zelrich-san. The dead apostle ancestor chuckled, just Zelrich is fine. His grandfather facade dropped, and his face and tone suddenly became deathly serious. Just how far are you willing to go to become a hero? Would you endure great pain, suffering, and emotional turmoil just to have a chance to achieve your dream? Izuku locked eyes with the elder vampire, his gaze firming, all fear and hesitation leaving him. When he next spoke, his tone was clear and unwavering, I will do anything to become a hero. To save people with a smile, that is my dream. The intensity in his eyes wavered, and the shakiness returned as he asked, why do you ask, Zelrich-san? Just then, their food arrived, and the old man of the jewels replied, I'll tell you after we eat. As Izuku graciously accepted his meal, he couldn't help but wonder what the odd man wanted to say to him in the back of his mind. Plates, empty sake jugs, and 4 glasses of soda were stacked in the middle of the table while the now satisfied occupants picked at their teeth with toothpicks. Rick let out a contented sigh, you know, I had my doubts considering this recommendation was coming from a walking corpse, who's even more of a piece of CRP than me, but after trying it myself, best Katsudon in the multiverse. Burp. I'm glad you enjoyed my cooking, sir. Izuku's eyes lit up upon hearing that voice, Mom. Sitting up, the foreigners beheld Inko Midoriya for the first time. She was a curvaceous woman with pale skin and violet eyes in her early 30s, with her midnight black hair tied up in a simple ponytail. She was wearing a pink uniform with a frilly white apron. Morty was the first to regain his wits, thanks for the food missus, it was awesome. It's no problem young man, it's good to see my son making friends. Tell me, how did you all meet? Izuku jumped in before anyone could speak up, they needed directions here, and I was on my way anyway after school, so I showed them the WAH here. Mentally sighing, the young boy was glad he could spare his mother any undue duress. That was, until. Yeah, after you got knocked the hell out by a bunch of thugs for trying to be a hero. Burp. Izuku. Seeing the tears gathering in her eyes, he tried to explain, well, I saw them in trouble, and I couldn't just sit by and do nothing. And the next thing you're going to say is, you could have gotten hurt. Zelrich said while pointing a finger at the elder Midoriya. You could have gotten hurt. Inko blinked, staring at the grinning elderly man with the cane. How did you do that? Years of practice. Now, Midoriya-chan, I would just like to point out that your son is fine. What he did was very foolish, yes. He paused, and Inko picked up where he left off, chastising her son, especially since he doesn't even have a dash. I know. Izuku cut his mother off, raising his voice to her for the first time in living memory. I know I don't have a quirk, I know I can't do anything. But if I stood by and did nothing, how could you expect me to look at myself in the mirror the next day or any day after? Izuku. Before a touching moment between mother and son could occur, the wizard marshal cleared his throat and announced, about that talk I wanted to have with you, Midoriya-chan. What if I told you that my quirk allowed me to give you superpowers? Give me superpowers? A quirk? Seeing the man nod, he gripped him by the collar of his coat and all but yelled, can you really do that? I can. Why? It was Inko who asked this. It's not that she wouldn't be grateful for this man for helping her son, but for him to seemingly appear out of nowhere and apparently grant a miracle seemed almost too fortuitous to be believed. Well, I have to pay him back for his aid, directions, and free food somehow, don't I? Free food? Izuku inquired, panicked. He knew he didn't have any money on him, and even if he did, Izuku also knew he didn't have enough to pay their collective tab. But of course. Your money's no good here, kid, not when your mom's the reason for my success. Looking past his mother, Don standing behind her wiping his hands on his apron. The food is free, the amount of alcohol you all consumed on the contrary. In response to this, a rainbow-colored portal the size of a vinyl record with various shapes fading in and out of view disappeared only for a stack of yen to fall out and into the man's waiting palm. Taking several thousand yen from the pile, he tossed it on the table looking at the owner questioningly. "That'll cover it, though I would ask that you not use your quirk in public, it's illegal you know. Plus, you're scaring my customers." Glancing around and seeing his fellow diners looking at him nervously, Zelrich laughed and said boisterously, "My friend, out of everyone at this table, I am the least dangerous. That honor goes to the crazy scientist here." Said crazy scientist flipped him the bird and said, "F off, you can't prove SHT. You turn flies into the DMN species on Earth in one dimension on a whim." Zelrich's tone was deadpan flat. Hey, I was trying to create an eco-friendly way to get rid of the trash. I just miscalibrated the potency of the growth HAREM, that's all." Rick retorted, arms crossed defensively over his chest, a scowl on his face. "The flies killed everyone," the wizard marshal reminded him. Seeing everyone looking at him horrified, flipped them the double deuces and said, "F you all, I'm not beholden to any of you." Turning to the vampire, he said, "Now, are you gonna do this or not? Hurry up, 'cause I really gotta take a SHT. The bathroom is over there." Inko pointed out. "Thanks." With that, he got up and left towards the back. "Wait, Rick, ah man." Turning to the mortified-looking woman, he said, "I'm sorry about my grandpa, he's been like this for as long as I've known him." To everyone. "So please, don't take it personally." Frowning sympathetically, Inko thought, what could possibly make a man so callous, jaded? Giving the young boy a pleasant understanding smile, she replied, "No need to trouble yourself, Morty-san, I understand." The sound of cracking knuckles was heard, and a moment later Zelrich placed a hand on Izuku's unruly mop of green hair. Grinning like a loon, he said, "Well, let's get started." "Wano, wait." But the vampire paid his protests no heed, instead intoning, in a profound and powerful voice, the infinite spiral, viewed through broken stained glass. Regimes rise, and fall. Some endure, others collapse. Heroes become villains, and villains, heroes. For every choice a consequence. One choice. A million different outcomes. The tree forks with every decision. I can see it all, infinite patterns. Unknown civilizations. Lost histories. All thanks to my kaleidoscope. Then there was a flash of rainbow-hued light. When Izuku next opened his eyes, he found himself laying in the lap of an unknown woman. Seeing him awake, she smiled lazily and said, "Ah, you're awake, good." Sitting up, Izuku looked around in confusion. He now found himself in a lavish traditional Japanese estate. A pool with two koi fish circling each other was just in front of him, and just beyond the perfectly manicured lawn was a grove of bamboo that stretched beyond the height of the outer wall. Returning his gaze to the woman upon whose lap he was resting upon, he took in her form. She looked appealing as she did elegant. Inky black hair framed her pale, aristocratic face, with eyes like a shadowy dark void staring warmly back into his green. She wore an off-white furosode-style kimono, long billowing sleeves trailing down from her arms, with images of wheat expertly woven into the fabric. A red obi with red tassels held the garment closed around her waist. She had a warm yet knowing look in her eyes, much like he had seen older siblings give their juniors in matters they had greater experience in. After a moment of looking into each other's eyes, the older of the two giggled, "You sure are a strange one, aren't you, Izuku-kun?" "Me, what about you? Who are you, by the way?" the young boy asked, curious as to how she could have known his name. She smiled like a Cheshire cat. A pause like the void filled the space between her answer. "Ryugi Shiki." He nodded, accepting it as quickly as one did, breathing without question. A comfortable silence fell between the two, and they enjoyed the quiet. The night was cool yet not cold, even with the light breeze present. Finally, Izuku asked, so, do you happen to know why I'm here? Who knows? Shiki said with a noncommittal shrug. But if I had to guess, it has to do with the meddling of a particular old man. Izuku nodded, not having it in him to disagree with her at all. She was right anyway. Zelrich was the reason he was here right now. His gaze settled on the spiraling koi fish. Around and around they went. Back and forth, a circle. No beginning and no end. It was both calming and hypnotic. A lot of things are like them, you know. He asked, turning a quizzical gaze back to her. Nodding, she explained, things are circular. Like the koi fish or two sides of a coin. I also believe that humans are naturally inclined to be evil. I don't dash. He stopped when she raised her hand, allowing her to finish. But just because I believe that, doesn't mean I'm not rooting for the heroes. It does make one wonder about the why though. Cocking his head to the side, Izuku inquired, why? Yes, why are some inclined to do good and others evil? Also, is one who does evil truly doing it for the sake of doing evil, or do their actions have good intentions? Seeing she was confusing the young boy, she gave a simple, easy to understand example. Say a man steals food from a store. He doesn't have money to pay for it, but he only does it, so he, and possibly his family, doesn't starve. He broke the law, so he should be a villain. Yet, his intentions were not evil, merely for self-preservation. Izuku found himself conflicted. Yes, what the man did was wrong, but if someone did it for reasons like that, then I couldn't consider that person a villain, no. If anything, I would offer to pay for the bread, so he doesn't get in trouble. Shiki smiled warmly, seemingly satisfied with his answer. She then continued, this time more introspective than before. Another example would be this. One person's villain can be considered a hero by another. Take the vigilantes for example. Heroes and villains, they need each other. One cannot exist without the other. In order to remember an existence, one must first abandon the existence. In order to save an existence, one must forget the existence. Longing and return are two sides of the same coin. Just like life and death. It's a paradoxical spiral. She then gave an awkward little laugh. I apologize. Most of that must have gone right over your head. Just forget about it, alright? But Izukumidoriya was smarter than Shiki Ryugi was giving him credit for. Though young, he understood the gist of what she was saying. It made him pause. It made him think. He began to mutter to himself. Something he did unconsciously when he was nervous or trying to figure something out. She's right. Without villains, heroes would be out of a job. But with villains, comes danger to people. I never really thought about why villains did what they did before though. As his head filled with such conflicting thoughts, his eyes began to droop. Shiki immediately took notice. Maybe you should lay back down. Izuku didn't think twice about accepting her offer, so caught up in his thoughts was he. Yet even distracted as he was, he couldn't help but ask, Shiki-san, is this a dream? Who knows? She shrugged, but if it is, it's pleasant for the both of us. Izuku nodded, his eyes growing heavy, but he still managed to ask one final question, will I see you again, Shiki-on-ezen? Stroking her hand through his green locks, Shiki told him, we will. He smiled moments before nodding off. Shiki placed an embrace on his brow, moments before his body faded away like a mirage. Shiki Ryugi stared off into the night. Her serene smile never leaving her face. The pain was the first thing Izuku felt. Mind-numbing, and intense enough to awaken the primal part of his mind. He couldn't even cry out as his throat seemed to just seize up. He wanted to escape the pain, yet it was impossible. As it felt like someone had stabbed him in the spine with almost 30 red-hot iron rods. The closest thing he could compare it to was all the times Kachin had used his explosions on him, only about 10 times more potent. Such was his agony that he didn't even register the needle piercing his flesh, but he felt the wave of relief it brought him. Finally able to release a pain-filled groan, he managed to crack his eyes open and hissed at the brightness of the lights. After trying and failing several times to form a coherent sentence, he managed to get out, "What hit me?" Kaleidoscope has its kinks. Especially when used on someone else. The voice of Zelrich replied, sounding only a little bit sympathetic. "Oh geez Rick, is Izuku gonna be okay?" "He'll be okay Morty, you moron. Quit your bitching. I injected him with the good stuff," again. "Izuku, are you alright dear?" Izuku heard his mother's voice and what he assumed was her hand on his shoulder. "I'm having trouble seeing at the moment, everything's too bright. Help me sit up please." Several pairs of hands pulled him into a sitting position. Izuku blinked foolishly, giving himself time to adjust. The first thing he saw once his vision finally came into focus was Zelrich looking at him curiously. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. "The pain?" the youth asked, having regained his wits now that said pain had been toned down to a dull if throbbing ache. "No, that's normal, I'm talking about your eyes." "That's unusual." Fear shaking his voice he asked, "What's wrong with my eyes?" In response, Zelrich spawned a mirror, uncaring of Don's squawk of indignation, and held it out for the boy to see. Shakily taking it, he leaned forward, he gazed at his reflection. His eyes were green, completely green. Both iris and pupil had been turned a vibrant emerald green. Izuku let out a sigh of relief. "I thought it was something serious. You had me scared there for a minute Zelrich-san. My eyes do look different, but it's not super noticeable." "Oh." The vampire said knowingly, before pulling some foreign change from somewhere and showing him both sides. One had a human head and the other an eagle. "I'm going to give this coin a toss, and I want you to tell me what it's going to end up on. Heads or tails?" "Why?" "Just do it, it'll confirm my suspicions." With that said, the wizard marshal tossed the coin into the air. Focusing on the coin as it made its ascent, both results appeared in his mind's eye. Various other factors like rotation speed and height were taken into account, and then, the image of the result appeared in his mind's eye. Tails. It landed in Zelrich's outstretched hand, it was tails. Grinning he did the same thing 9 more times. Every time, he called the result, and every time, he got it right. Then, the crafty old man added another coin. This time, he saw 4 different outcomes. Panicking he picked at random this time. Left is heads, right is tails. Much to his surprise, he got it right. The exercise was repeated 4 more times to the exact same result. Finally, Rick asked what everyone was thinking, how the hell is the kid doing that? Just as I expected. When I gave you your powers, everything didn't settle in properly. Nothing bad is going to happen of course, but it's given you a unique skill. A particular set of eyes. Rifling through his bag, Izuku pulled out his notebook and flipped to a specific page. You mean like Eraserhead? He's a hero who can cancel out other people's quirks on eye contact. They said to turn red when he does. Burp, mind if I take a look at that notebook kiddo? Seeing no harm in it, but slightly nervous about what the man would make of his hobby, he handed it over to the mad scientist. Who began flipping through it as the wizard marshal explained, what you've got there lad, are a rare set of eyes. So rare in fact, that only one person has ever had them before you. He paused for dramatic effect and then said, Miyamoto Musashi. Izuku felt his jaw drop. Even though quirks and heroes had become the norm over the last 200 years, the name of Miyamoto Musashi was still highly regarded. As he was venerated to this day, as the saint of the sword. Why you're kidding right? I am not. These eyes are the Empyrean eyes, also known as the eyes of heaven. The reason you always got your guesses right, is because these eyes not only allow you to see the future but influence their outcomes through sheer force of will. Yes, you've got a pair of good eyes now, but that doesn't mean a DMN thing unless you know how to defend yourself, which brings us to our next topic. Getting you some proper teachers. Wait, what? Grinning, the dead apostle ancestor replied, I'll explain once we arrive. What do you dash? Izuku didn't get a chance to finish as a multi-hued portal opened beneath him, swallowing him whole. He landed with a small thud. Sitting up, he found himself in what was unmistakably a dojo. Long polished wooden floors stretched to the far wall, where several katana sat. The place was lit by the slowly fading rays of the sun, casting the place half in shadow. While this place is amazing, why did that madman send me here? That's an excellent question. A strong if elderly voice agreed. Spinning on his heel, Izuku turned and gasped. Two old men were sitting a shogi board and a small tray of tea between them, their gazes locked on him. The first had a head of spiky silver hair complemented by bushy eyebrows and a thick mustache. Piercing blue eyes peered out from his tanned, weathered and lined face. He was wearing a simple black shirt and white shorts. The other had gray streaks in his hair, which was up in a topknot. He had a long jagged scar on the left side of his face, trailing from his temple to the end of his chin, crossing over his eye. He wore a hooded red cloak over a black haori which covered a plain white kimono and hakama pants. Izuku, being the hero nerd he was, recognized them instantly. They were the first-generation heroes before quirks became prevalent. Silver Fang and Atomic Samurai. Both also went by their names of Bang and Kamikaze. Your S Silverfang and Aya Atomic Samurai. They both adopted looks of surprise when he called them by their hero names. Bang then spoke, his tone kindly and grandfatherly, My, I'm surprised one as young as you knows about us old relics. Most kids your age look up to heroes with flashy quirks like All Might. While I do look up to All Might. I really look you up to you too as WL. A look of shock crossed the young boy's face, and he suddenly bowed, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's an honor to meet you both. This caused both retired heroes to chuckle, and Kamikaze then said, No need to be so formal, kid, we're retired. But we're curious as to how you know that meddlesome piece of CRP vampire. Vampire? You mean Zelrich-san? Seeing them nod, he replied, he said something about getting me training and teachers, then I'm here. Kamikaze shared a look with Bang, you don't think he means? Probably, yes, Bang replied. Suddenly a multicolored portal opened, and the wizard marshal stepped through, saying, coming through a portal like a normal person. There's nothing normal about coming through a portal out of nowhere. The three thought simultaneously. Grinning like a loon, Zelrich said, I see you three have become acquainted. Speaking directly to the retired heroes, he said, I assume you figured out why I brought him here already. You want us to train him. Bang said, shocking the young boy, not that I'm opposed to the idea, but why him? It would amuse me. Plus Izuku, a boy with no quirk, really wants to be a hero. I thought it appropriate that he be trained by you too. The two heroes turned to the boy in surprise, and Atomic Samurai asked, Oi, kid, is it true? Do you really intend to try and become a hero without a quirk? Why yes, sir. It's why I look up to you too. You were heroes without quirks, meaning it's possible even for someone like me to become a hero. Upon hearing his answer, Kamikaze tossed the boy two things. An apple and one of his swords. Seeing the questioning look he was receiving, the samurai said to his would-be pupil, take that sword and cut the apple. Depending on how well you do, I might decide to teach you a thing or two. Izuku picked up the sword first, feeling drawn to it for lack of a better term. He pulled it out of its sheath and looked at it. The sword, Hocho Toshiro, was an heirloom of the Ashikaga shogunate, forged almost 700 years ago in the year 1569. It had a 2-shaku and 7-sun long blade that had been folded over several times during the forging process, giving it a ripple pattern on the edge. Possessing simple circular guard made of solid iron, with the grip wrapped in genuine rayskin and silk cord. 2 brass pegs held the blade securely to the handle, with an iron cap on the end. Simple, elegant, and deadly. The blade was thin and sharp like a kitchen knife. This sword had spilled much blood in its day, mostly human but also the blood of inhuman things. Due to its bloody history, it had a thirst for blood and a longing to cut things into mincemeat. Izuku didn't question how he knew all of this. To him, it just felt normal, much like breathing. A human didn't question why it happened. It did and was accepted as normal. Placing the blade back in its scabbard, he held it loosely in his left hand before picking up the apple. He gave it a quick toss into the air. In one smooth motion, his legs spread bent slightly at the knees, his right hand rested on the sword, and he turned his waist slightly. When the fruit reached the apex of its toss, it stopped. He drew. Dozens of transecting flashes of light crisscrossing over each other happened in mere moments. When the apple finally did hit the ground, it did so in finely cubed bits. Silence reigned in the dojo as both retired heroes stared in shock. Atomic Samurai in particular. After all, it wasn't every day you saw some kid perfectly replicate his signature atomic slash. Managing to pull himself together, he grinned like a wolf, saying, "Well, I think I've made up my mind." Izuku waited with bated breath for the hero to speak. Finally, he did. "You'd better show up here tomorrow after school and understand?" Grinning from ear to ear, he bowed at the waist and said, "Why yes sir. I promise I won't disappoint you." "I'm sure you won't. Before you go." He disappeared and came back with a brochure to the dojo Atomic Waterfall Slashing Rock. They just combined the names of Bang's combat style and his signature move. Izuku thought to himself, feeling sorry for the 2 men. But now he knew it was located just a short train ride away in the Aichi prefecture, with the address only a few blocks from the train station. "I'll be here." "Excellent. Well, lad, time to get you back to your mom before she floods the place with tears." Without another word, Zelrich opened up another glowing portal and tossed the boy through it by the scruff of his neck before walking through himself. Only to stop when Bang said, "What would you have done if we refused to train the boy vampire?" "I would have reminded you that you both owe me a favor. Teach the kid. Do a good job, and we'll call it even, eh?" "Saitama, is he still?" Bang questioned. "Still fighting?" "Yes. But even he can't keep it up forever. To kill such a concept you need a stronger concept." Bang nodded, "I see." With that, the wielder of the second magic walked out of their lives for the second time in 20 years. When he arrived back at the cat sedan, Izuku was immediately squeezed almost into unconsciousness by his own mother. She began to shoot off questions in rapid fire. "Izuku, are you alright? Did you get hurt? What happened? Did that strange man hurt you again?" He pleaded. She released him, and after he caught his breath, he answered, "Yes, no, I got to meet 2 of my favorite heroes next to All Might who chose to take me on as their apprentice, and no." Inko released a sigh, "Thank goodness." Looking past his mother, he spotted Rick, who was now sporting a couple of lumps. Surzex was looking rather smug. "What happened to you, Rick-san?" "I was convinced to help you with this whole hero thing." Surzex snickered. "I would have done it anyway. You're one smart cookie kid," he said while handing him back his notebook. "Not on my level of course, but still. So here's the deal. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. In other words, you help me with the occasional problem, and I can make with the super science and make you things like armor or whatever. Deal?" Rick held out a hand, which Izuku shook vigorously. "Deal, Rick-san. Thank you so much." Yeah, Lego my armo. Where the hell is that nut job? He ditched us, didn't he?" Rick's tone was flat. Surzex nodded. "That sounds like him. I don't suppose you'd be willing to give me a lift back home?" Rolling his eyes, Rick replied, his tone drier than Death Valley in the middle of summer. Sure, why not? I'm being super charitable today. Thanks. He then turned to Izuku and said, I may have some work for an aspiring hero in the future. If something comes up, you'll be the first person I call. How's that sound? Gee, great. I'll do my best if you need me. Yes, Surzek-san. Ruffling his hair, the daimyo replied, I'm sure you will. Good luck in your studies, Izuku-san. Rick then pulled out his portal gun and shot it into the floor. First stop, the ninth circle of hell. Izuku was beginning to think Rick-san had a rather morbid sense of humor, calling wherever Surzek called home hell. Is it New Jersey? One of the few times he's ever called home, Dad said that place was hell on earth. Something about a terrifying monster called a Snooki. Whatever that is. Regardless, he didn't get a chance to ask as Surzek cannonballed into the green portal. Once he was gone, the portal closed, and Rick hit a few more buttons saying to his grandson, say goodbye Morty, we're leaving. See you later little buddy. We'll be in touch. Was all Morty could get out before Rick dragged him backward into the portal. Izuku couldn't help but grin from ear to ear. Within the span of a few hours, he'd made quite a few friends, got some kind of superpower that still needs to figure out, has two of his favorite heroes taking him under his wing, and could even get some experience under his belt in heroism. Yes, indeed things were looking up. If he had even an inkling of what kind of hell he would be in for over the next few years, he would have run in the other direction. Very far, very fast. Izuku's eyes snapped open moments before his alarm clock went off. He managed to reset the buzzer before it went off, potentially waking his mother. It was 6:30 in the morning, after all, no time for her to be up. No time for any child of his age to be awake either. But Izukumidoriya wasn't just any child. He wanted to become a hero, and that meant making sacrifices. Like sleeping in. So, quiet as he could, he got dressed in a pair of sweatpants, matching shirt and taking his notebook with him before slipping out the door. A ghost in the gray morning light. As he jogged his way towards the nearby park where he did his morning exercises, his mind mentally flashed back to all the strong work he's done over the last 3 months. The first week was utter hell. The best analogy he had was his body was wet clay, and both of his new senseis were molding it into a new shape with the skill akin to that of MSTR sculptures. Every day after school, for the first week he was put through rigorous exercises. Jumping jacks, push-ups, squats, curls, long jogs. He was taught meditation by Bang Sensei to give his muscles some time to cool down, then he would spar with each of them. By the end of the first day, he was dumped in an ice bath, and he assumed they were trying to kill him via inducing hypothermia. At the end of the week, he felt like a giant bruise and not a person. This trend continued for a month, and Izuku began to make a note of certain things. When he meditated, for example, he felt a strange foreign presence in his left side. Racing down his arm along his chest and even up into his neck. They were long and seemed to branch off like that of a tree. Whenever he would attempt to mentally push against one of them, he would receive a jolt. As if he had touched a live wire. So he didn't know what these things were, but he assumed they were a part of whatever Zelrich-san had done to him. He had taken to following the lines as he meditated. Tracing out their pathways and junctions. The branches numbered 32 in all, and went all the way down his left arm, across his chest, and down his neck. He could even feel one near his eyes. He assumed that whatever these things were, they were responsible for his Empyrean eyes manifesting. Many times he silently wished Zelrich had stuck around and actually explained what he did to him. But if wishes were fishes, no one would go hungry. So Izuku did what he always did when he came upon something new and unknown. He observed it and wrote down any observations he made. He did this whenever he meditated, and after every spar, he lost. Due to this habit of his, the green-haired boy was quick to deduce he had an unnatural affinity when it came to learning swordsmanship. With every bout he had with Kamikaze-sensei, he seemed to get just a little bit better, last a bit longer than last time. He may have lost every fight, but the fact he was lasting a little longer each time was a win in his book. Even if it was just a personal victory. He could not, however, say the same for his attempt to learn Bang Sensei's martial art, the water stream rock-breaking fist. No matter how strong he tried, he just couldn't seem to grasp the fundamentals of the style. He understood the concept, of course. It was more or less Tai Chi taken to its absolute pinnacle. To flow around the attacks of the opponent like water. Deflecting, redirecting, or otherwise evading attacks and retaliating with crushing force after the enemy had left themselves exposed. Despite knowing the principles, being shown the forms time and time again, and learning the breathing exercises, it just wouldn't click like wielding a sword did. Still, despite his constant failures and fretting, he had seen something in the way of results. After 3 months of intense training, he was looking rather fit for a 6-year-old. Gone was his pudginess and most of his baby fat. He now also felt confident that he could defend himself from the average mugger if not a villainous quirk user. His confidence had skyrocketed to the point he only actually stuttered around bakugou anymore. Another thing he'd gained is insight on his and bakugou's relationship. After spending time with people who genuinely wanted to help him improve and believed he could, in fact, become a hero, he realized that, while he respected and idolized him to an extent, the explosion quirk user did not show him even a modicum of the same respect or even kindness. That if Bakugou Katsuki really was his friend, he would not be started torturing him when he found out he was quirkless but stood up for him. Yet he didn't do that. Instead, he mocked and belittled him. With this revelation, came anger. He wanted to lash out at the explosive boy, to easily break his collarbone with a bakken like he knew he could. But he knew in his heart that doing so would be wrong. Heroes help people. He hurt Bakugou, then he not only would be no better than the short-fused boy, but he would essentially be acting like a villain. So, in the end, he took that anger, and he wound it into a tight little ball, and he let it sit there in the back of his mind. Instead, he trained harder than ever, putting that energy to good use. Which is why he now finds himself in the park early every morning. To push himself ever further towards his goal of becoming a hero. One step at a time. So, he's shown up again. He's persistent, I'll give him that. The petite woman thought from her spot on the bench, a warm cup of black mocha coffee keeping her hands warm as the young boy showed up to the park yet again. The woman in question was Tatsumaki, the Tornado of Terror. Former S-Class rank 2 hero some 20 years ago. She was little, standing at only 142 cm/4'8", with a ghostly pale complexion, and had curly lime green hair that swirled in such a way that it looked like some form of mint ice cream. The only signs of age she had were the lines around her cheeks. She took no notice of the boy at first. Merely coming to the park in the mornings like she always did for the peace and quiet. But she quickly heard him panting and watched silently from her bench on the opposite end of the park as he pushed himself, leaving as the sun rose higher in the sky. At first, she shrugged him off, thinking he was like all the other kids these days. Trying just strong enough to get his quirk under control, and then he'll let himself laze about, never bothering to push himself even further than that. Kids these days are so lazy. A complete lack of work ethic is the problem. YUA's entrance exam is a cakewalk for anyone who's actually trained even a little. Heck, back in my day, people like us were tortured to unlock our maximum potential. Now they're so lazy they don't even try. I bet that kid won't even come back tomorrow. But he did. He kept coming back, day after day, time after time. Staying extra long on the weekends. He would push himself further and further. Before she knew it, Tatsumaki was coming to the park just to watch the boy, grudgingly impressed with his ethic and drive. She wanted to ask him his name and his reason for coming here day after day, yet at the same time, she didn't want to distract him from his workouts. So she kept her silent, curious vigil. Then one day fate smiled on her. The boy, as she had dubbed him in her mind, was completing some pull-ups on some monkey bars meant for children when he lost his grip, falling to the wood-chip-coated earth below and landing on his back. She could tell he was breathing heavily even from where she sat. Growing concerned, she floated off her bench and made her way over to him, somewhat eager to finally get a good look at his face. "Oi, are you okay?" Izuku looked up from his place on the ground to see someone floating above him covered in a green aura. His first thought was, wow, she's short. Then, she must have a telekinetic quirk of some kind. Finally, he opened his mouth and replied, "I'm okay, thanks. I just need a minute." He could tell by the look on her face that she didn't believe a word he was saying right now. With a flick of her hand, Izuku found himself in a sitting position, resting against the monkey bars. With another movement, the bag the boy brought with him was in front of her, unzipped, and a water bottle was uncapped and floating its way towards him. He accepted it graciously, saying, "Thanks, but you didn't need to go through all the trouble, Tatsumaki-san." The former hero blinked in surprise. "You know who I am?" Taking a long swig from the plastic bottle first, he nodded before letting out a contented sigh. "Ah, that's better. But yeah, both of my senseis talk about you fondly. They like to reminisce about the good old days. Plus I think they like that I'm around to listen." Now Tatsumaki found herself intrigued. His teachers must be former S-class. But who could they be? Hearing a chuckle, she looked over to the boy, whose name she still didn't know, and saw him chuckling at her expense. Narrowing her eyes, she asked, "And what's so funny? You looked like you were really deep in thought there for a moment." So, she didn't see the humor. "You looked like you might need to go to the bathroom," he replied. A blush staining her cheeks, Tatsumaki grit out, "Why, you must be okay if you can mouth off to your elders." She coated the wood chips in her aura, smiling maliciously, her voice full of faux sweetness. The tornado of terror said, "Let's see how fast you can run." He took off like a shot. A small swarm of wood chips hounding his every step as he ran around the park. An annoyed psychokinetic following closely behind, a little smirk on her face. Huffing and puffing surrounded by wood chips, Izuku held up his hands in surrender. I give. You got me. Humph. That should teach you to respect your elders, you cocky little brat. Tatsumaki said, arms crossed in front of her near the non-existent chst, a smug look of superiority on her face as she floated a few inches off the ground. Right, sorry. You're forgiven, on one condition. She spoke imperiously, holding up a single finger. Sighing and suppressing a shudder at what the former number 2 could ask of him, he asked, "What is it?" "I want to know your name." The freckled boy smiled brightly, "Midoriya Izuku. Pleased to meet you, Tatsumaki-san." The moment was ruined by the rumbling of both of their stomachs. Looking up into the sky, the boy sighed and said, "Aw man, I lost track of time. My mom is gonna be ticked. Well, since I'm already gonna get in trouble anyway, wanna come over to my place and have breakfast?" The tornado of terror blinked, thrown off by the sudden invite. A second louder rumble from her insides made the decision for her. Shrugging, she said, "Sure. Mom, I'm back, and I brought a guest," Izuku said as made it through the front door. He had just managed to get his shoes off when his mother dashed into the foyer, a bowl of pancake batter floating around her and looking worried. "Midoriya Izuku. Do you have any idea how worried I was about you?" Izuku winced upon hearing his mother use his full name. He knew he was in for it now. "I came to get you up for school and find you're missing. I called Bang-sensei, and he told me not to worry, that you were likely out doing morning training, something I wish you had told me about. At any rate, I already called the school and told them you weren't feeling well today." Izuku hung his head, feeling sorry for worrying his mother, the very thing he didn't want to do. "Sorry Mom, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. Thanks for calling the school." Tatsumaki, who had been silently staring at Midoriya's mother in a dumbstruck fashion up until now, finally spoke up. Her voice shaky and stuttering yet hopeful, she asked, "Fubuki? Is that you? Upon hearing that name, Izuku watched his mother freeze up, her face taking up a sickly pale pallor, and her head jerked mechanically to the short esper next to him. She stared like a deer in headlights for a time before finally muttering out, "Onezen." Izuku, being the bright kid he was, pieced it together rather quickly. Thus he couldn't help but ask, "Mom, are you Fubuki, the blizzard of hell?" Snapping herself out of her daze, Inko turned to her son and smiling sweetly said, "Izuku, why don't you go take a bath? I'll call you when breakfast is ready, okay?" Izuku blinked twice before nodding, "Okay, Mom." He walked down the hall only to stop, turn and say, "You know, if you wanted to talk to her alone, Mom, all you had to do was ask." With that, he left, and Tatsumaki couldn't help but quip, "Humph, not even 10 and already that perceptive." She trailed off before turning back to her taller younger sister and saying, "So." Adopting a cold facade, she said to her elder sister, "Come in. I'm sure you have questions, and insults to hurl my way." Tatsumaki winced but said nothing as she followed her to the kitchen, bowl of cake batter floating behind her. Levitating the bowl to the kitchen counter, she went to the fridge, and collected eggs and began cracking them into a pan. "If I recall correctly, you like your eggs over strong, correct?" Caught off guard by the sudden inquiry, the tiny esper managed to get out, "Yes." The Midoriya matriarch smiled, smirked, just like Izuku. Hearing the warmth in her little sister's tone, Tatsumaki said, "You love him a lot." "I can tell." "Of course I do. He's my son." A pause followed by a sigh, ending with her turning around and facing her sister. "What are you doing here, Tatsumaki? Did you figure out Izuku was my son and decided that getting close to him would let you get near me?" Thrown off balance by the sudden inquisition, the little esper could only say, "And no, that's not it. I didn't even know you were his mother. Though I will admit to watching him for a while now." "Why?" Huffing, she replied, "Well, if you must know, his work ethic impressed me. Kids these days think they're special and are going to do great things just because they have quirks. PFF, yeah, right. It wasn't like that for you or me. We were forced to be great. We chose to be heroes. Now a lot of them think it's some kind of God-given right. But not him. I've watched him show up at the park every day and push himself. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Your son has drive Fubuki, he intends to become a hero, and he wants it bad." The hero-turned-housewife nodded, "I know. He's the entire reason I quit being a hero. I wanted to keep him safe. But going out, saving people in danger, being a hero. It's the only thing he's ever wanted. When I found out he was born without a quirk dash. He was born quirkless." Tatsumaki was equal parts horrified and saddened upon hearing this. But her thoughts quickly turned to anger. She had no doubt in her mind that her nephew was bullied due to this. She would learn their names. She would find out where they lived. She would make them pay. Yes, he found out 2 years ago when he was 4, well, go on ahead and say it. "Say what?" Fukuki threw up her hands, "Say how I'm weak, how I'm a loser, how you were right about his father, how pathetic I am without you looking over my shoulder all the time. How sad it is that I, a former hero, am now nothing but a devoted housewife. Go on, we both know you want to, so go ahead and get it over with. Another pause before, but after you have breakfast. I want you out of this house. I want you to forget you ever found me. Because I refuse to let you treat my son like you did me. He's been through enough, he doesn't need your form of help. Am I clear?" Tatsumaki withstood her sister's verbal assault without comment. Once she was finished, she spoke, "You know, you're not the only one who's changed over the past 6 years. When you left, I looked for you fearing you'd been kidnapped by a mysterious being or something. I looked for months hardly eating, barely sleeping, don't even get me started on that group of yours. After a year and a half with no sign, you were legally declared dead. I took some time off to reflect on some things after that. Tatsumaki took a breath, stealing her nerves before continuing. I started thinking back on you and me. The way we interacted. I realized I might have been a bit overbearing. A bit? Fubuki huffed. Okay, a lot. Now, can I finish? Seeing her sister nod, she cleared her throat and continued, sheesh, here I am, trying to apologize, and this is what I get. Ahem, anyway, what I'm trying to get to is this. Was I overbearing, overprotective, and even cruel? Yes, and I'm sorry for that, but in my defense dash. Oh, here we go. Fubuki stage whispered. In my defense, Tatsumaki said a bit harsher, what I went through when mom and dad gave me away to those scientists for a check was nothing less than torture. Now I realize that doesn't excuse what I did, I'm just hoping you understand why I did it. Tatsumaki walked over to her sister and took her hand. I wanted to know I needed to be strong. After Blast, after he saved me, he told me I shouldn't rely on other people to save me next time. At the time I was being used in a project called MK Omega, it was the successor to America's MK Ultra way back in the 1970s. The point of the project was to read the minds of hundreds of thousands at once and stop potential threats before they happened. I was subjected to all kinds of drags, sensory deprivation, the works. A cup was covered in a green aura before it was flung across the room. Upon seeing that, the tornado of terror took a moment to collect herself. My point is, I wanted you to be strong, so something like that never had to happen to you. I wanted you to push yourself. Instead, you rookie crushed, only fighting people you knew you could beat and formed a group. Not that having a group is a bad thing, but a group of weak individuals who aren't strong individually is still a group of weaklings no matter how nice they might be. Crossing her arms and leaning against the counter, Inko ne Fubuki said, so far all you've done is reopen old wounds. So unless you have a point to make. She left the rest unsaid. Get to the point or leave. Tatsumaki tried to bore a hole into the floor with her gaze. After a moment she spoke, her tone unusually soft and desperate, please, Fubuki. Please, don't send me away. Not after I've found you again. Not after finding out I have a nephew. Various objects started to levitate as the Esper began to lose control. Then she did something that shocked her younger sister. She looked up at her, with unshed tears in her eyes. Wunchin, she's crying. Tatsumaki dash. I realize I probably burned any bridge between us a long time ago. But dash. She tried again. Tatsu dash. She was met with the same level of success. Please, I need to get it right this time. To really be there for someone who needs me. So don't send me away, I am begging you. Wunchin. Fubuki's shout got her shorter older sister's attention. Yes. Bending down, she wrapped her arms around her overbearing, selfish, well-meaning, crying older sister, saying, you can stay. Sniffling a little, the midget Esper managed to get out, I can, really. You're sure? I am. Thank you, Fubuki. There in a small kitchen apartment, the bond between two sisters began to heal. Sitting in the bath, Izuku mulled over what he'd learned. My mom is Fubuki, the blizzard of hell. The former #1 B-ranked hero, founder, and leader of the eponymous blizzard group. Lashing out in anger, Izuku smashed his fists into the warm water, causing droplets to scatter all over. He was proud of his mother and her accomplishments. Yet at the same time, he felt only deep-seated anger at his own predicament. If his mother was so strong, such a renowned hero, then why was he, her son, born quirkless? He just didn't understand how fate could be so cruel. Sinking deeper into the bath, he thought to himself, still, I wonder why she left in the first place. Did she leave because of me? Does she still keep in touch with the blizzard group? This and many other thoughts raced around in his head as he blew bubbles in the bathwater. Finally, he came to a decision. I think, it's time to get the band back together. With his mind made up, he got out of the bath, a plan already forming in his mind. All he needed to do was get to his computer real quick before going downstairs. By the time Izuku returned downstairs, the smell of food and civil conversation filled the air. Well, I don't smell any smoke, meaning the apartment isn't on fire. The fact they aren't screaming at each other is also a plus. Since I can hear them talking, it means they haven't killed each other. That's a good sign. Perhaps it was due to spending too much time around the old veterans that were his senseis Kamikaze and Bang, but he'd become a tad cynical and quite pragmatic in his reasoning as of late. I need more friends my own age. He stopped, realizing he didn't actually have anyone in his age group that he could call his friend. Strike that, I just need friends my age. Shaking his head at the unfairness of it all, he entered the kitchen to find his mother and aunt had just finished placing the last of breakfast on the table. He noted the kitchen looked like more of a mess than usual and that the Western breakfast the two had cooked was a bit overdone. He also made a note of the fact that Tatsumaki had flour in her hair. It's odd having an aunt all of the sudden. He thought to say, breakfast looks good. As they sat down to eat, he noticed Tatsumaki kept her eyes on him. After a few bites of food, he asked, "Something on your mind, Tatsuobi-san?" The tornado of terror beamed at him, calling her his aunt, taking a bite of her eggs before replying, "Nothing really, I'm just curious about you is all." "Me? What do you want to know?" "Everything. What you like, what you dislike, what you do for fun, who your friends are." She got closer and closer to him with every word she spoke. It was only when he leaned back that she became conscious of what she was doing. Leaning back in her seat, she took a calming breath before saying, "Sorry about that. I feel like I need to make up for about 6 years of lost time." He just gave her a warm smile. "That's fine. To answer your questions, I really like my mom's cooking, especially her katsudon. I enjoy learning about new heroes, their quirks, and how they work. I guess training is my hobby. Speaking of quirks, how does yours work, Tatsu?" He didn't mention anything about friends. The Esper noted, filing that away for later before saying, "I have psychokinesis. It allows me to do all kinds of things with my mind. From telekinesis to mind reading and such. I can easily lift a skyscraper with my powers." She demonstrated her power by nonchalantly levitating him off of his seat before setting him back down. After which she noted that everything she told him, he was writing all this down in a notebook she hadn't taken note of beforehand. He had even started on a sketch of himself floating covered in an aura. "What's the drawback of your quirk?" "I don't have one. I have yet to find something I can't lift, and using my power over extended periods of time doesn't really seem to do anything to me other than giving a slight headache." Tapping his pen against his chin, he said, "Odd, all quirks have some kind of drawback." His eyes widened as he continued to stare at her. What is it?" she asked, not sure she liked that look on his face. Clearing his throat, he said, I think I might know what your quirk's drawback is." This caught both Espers by surprise. For years Tatsumaki didn't think she had such a thing. She assumed it had to do with all the tests done during the MK Omega. Yet her nephew seems to have caught onto something. "Izuku?" his mother inquired. Clearing his throat and looking at his aunt sideways, he said, "Promise not to get mad." Seeing the short Esper nod, he began to elaborate on his theory. "Well, I think your drawback is the reason you're so short." The effect was instantaneous. Tatsumaki's face became stoic, and then she said in an equally flat tone, "Explain." Clearing his throat, Izuku began, "Well, we were learning about formicides a couple of weeks ago, and we had to give reports on them. Wait, hold on, what's a formicide?" "Oh, sorry. Ants. That's their scientific name. Anyway, we learned that ants can lift 10 times their body weight. I believe your psychic powers could work in a similar vein. In other words, the drawback of your quirk affected your brain chemistry and prevented you from growing." Tried as she might, the world's strongest Esper could not think of anything to refute her nephew's logic. Which is why she ground out after a moment of tense silence, son of beach. Onezen. Language. Rubbing the back of her head, the green-haired Esper said, sorry, looking to her nephew she said pointedly, don't repeat that. Seeing him nod, she decided to change the topic, so Izuku-kun, do you have any plans today? I was thinking of going to the dojo and putting some work in. Why do you ask? Tatsumaki nodded, you're learning under those old geezers Bang and Kamikaze, right? Humph, well, calling Bang a geezer is a bit generous. He's really a relic by this point. To be honest, I'm surprised he's still alive. He was over 80 back in our hero days. Izuku's chopstick missed his mouth due to hearing this. Bang sensei is over 100? Oh wow. He looks like he's in his 70s at best. Tatsumaki nodded, yeah, he always did take excellent care of himself. He'll probably outlive us all just cause. Are you learning anything interesting from those old men? Giving her a nod of his own, Izuku replied, yeah, they've been teaching me their fighting styles. It's bizarre though. I pick up on Kamikaze's sword style quickly enough. Like holding a sword just feels natural, I guess. But when it comes to learning Bang Sensei's martial art. He paused a moment of introspection, I dunno, it just doesn't click, if you know what I mean. Tatsumaki's eyes narrowed as she hummed to herself. Seeing her looking so introspective, he inquired, what is it, Tatsuobi-san? Maybe nothing. But would you mind if I came with you to this dojo? I wouldn't mind catching up with those old men. Sure. He's up to something. Tatsumaki noted, before brushing it off, he'll tell me eventually. The young boy stood up from the table, I'll do the dishes since you two cooked, then we'll need to see about catching a train. Train? Tatsumaki asked, amused, why take a train when you can fly? Oh. Yeah, I guess we could do that, as long as you're okay with it. He agreed. Letting out an amused huff, Tatsumaki retorted, would I have even bothered mentioning it if I wasn't? No, I suppose not. Tatsumaki proceeded to float the dirty dishes into the sink, which she had also filled with warm water and soap. Come on, I'll wash, you dry. It'll get done faster this way. He looked to his mother in silent protest, only for her to shrug and sigh, saying, it's best to just let her have her way on certain things, son. Plus she's right. It will get done faster if you both work together. Grumbling under his breath about no good deed going unpunished, he went and helped his aunt clean the plates. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author bubbajack on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.